Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Seeds for Change, a podcast by the Institute for Applied Ecology. My name is Sierra Dawson, and I am your host for the episode today. Today's episode is special because not only is it the first full episode of our podcast, but it also features the person that made all of this possible. And that person is none other than Tom Kaye. Tom Kaye is the executive director of the Institute for Applied Ecology. He founded our growing nonprofit back in 1999, and you'll hear him say it in this episode. But as he recalls it, IAE started with him, a couple of grad students, and a dream of studying rare plants here in Oregon. I personally began this interview today with Tom calling him a superstar botanist of Oregon, and you'll hear him humbly try to deny it, but I still think it's true. We'll hear from him today about his journey through academia and summer jobs, all the way to where he is now, leading an organization dedicated to conservation. So without further ado, here's Tom Kaye.
Thank you, Sierra. That's very flattering. And I must dispute this superstar title. There are just so many people that have done great work in the Willamette Valley and so many wonderful colleagues that I get to work with that deserve more credit than me. But I'm happy to tell you about my journey and how I've gotten involved here. So in terms of my journey, before I started the Institute for Applied Ecology back in 1999, I really started and got interested in ecology as a high school student. I did a short, week-long field trip to the Oregon coast near Cascade Head and spent a lot of time in the forests and trying to understand land management and ecology, and just got really interested in botany. And then when I went to college, I majored in environmental science at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And it was college, so I had lots of different courses, but I really liked my ecology and botany classes. And when I got out of college, I applied for two different summer jobs. One was with the Washington Department of Geology, and one was with the National Park Service at Olympic National Park. And I didn't get the geology job, but I did get the botany job at the Park Service. And that really helped me on my course. I had great supervisors and mentors there, just wonderful people to work with. And we were sampling vegetation to understand the impacts of introduced mountain goats in the alpine environment. And that was so great. I did that for a couple of years. Our office was the alpine zone, and we didn't have to wear uniforms like everybody else in the National Park Service had to. And we felt like rogue scientists. It was really a great experience. And that set me up to do a master's degree in botany. And I went to Oregon State University in the botany and plant pathology department and specialized in systematics and ecology. And I really got into rare plants and studying the demography, the population biology of rare plants. My project ended up being at Olympic National Park with a rare milk vetch. It was very rewarding, and it took me into a lot of different directions. I had a hard time focusing, I have to admit, still do, but it was really a great way to engage with the field in a way that was so satisfying for me.
Nice.
After that master's degree is when I joined the Oregon Department of Agriculture and worked for 10 years studying rare plants in Oregon. It took me all over the state of Oregon, and I learned so much about so many different species and was able to bring to bear some of the education I'd received with my master's program to studying lots of different kinds of plants. And we did a lot of monitoring of rare species to try to understand their basic biology, how they reproduce, do they make seedlings, what are the factors that affect their ability to have viable populations. Et cetera. And then also, what are the management techniques that might be useful for improving their population trends in the future as well. So that's, how I got through that stage. then towards the end of my time at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, I started a PhD program at Oregon State to continue my education. I was really fortunate that I was able to use the data that I had collected on the job for my research projects, which were about developing population models to understand the extinction process and the viability process of populations of a variety of rare plants in Oregon. I had almost 10 years of data for some of these species. And so it allowed a lot of depth of analysis that I wouldn't have normally been able to do with a shorter graduate school program.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really how I got into the PhD. And what I came out with was a real thirst for doing more for ecology. The reason for starting IAE for me, the thing that really inspired me to do a nonprofit institute for applied ecology was an interest in doing more than observing the natural world,
Okay.
but engaging with it and helping it.
Yeah. Okay.
In a very applied way.
Mm-hmm.
I'd spent years monitoring rare plant populations, basically passively watching them change
Right.
and mostly decline.
Mm-hmm.
And I was interested in doing more, taking the bull by the horns and making some real change. So starting a nonprofit institute was a way to step into a different role to engage with conservation and make an impact that was beyond kind of a purely academic approach.
Got it. Wow, I heard a lot in that response. It sounds like your journey with ecology started young, and something that I have noticed about the people that I speak to in this field is that a lot of the interest starts with a very routine kind of school trip in some way.
Yeah.
Like for me, what got me interested in science, natural science, is also like an outdoor science camp that was like a week. In my case, it was in Malibu, California. But it is interesting that so many people in this field have experiences like that, because it seems like just an opportunity for enrichment and to do something different in the time while you're that age. But it does leave a lasting impact for people that it really piques their interest and they want to know more, and then they do this thing and then this thing and this thing, and it just kind of leads them down this path. So it's interesting that I keep seeing this pattern when I talk to people about outdoor science schools or just like going to a science museum or something like that. It really does have an impact on people.
Yeah.
And I also heard that you had this moment of reckoning when you were finishing your undergraduate of college, where you applied for 2 jobs and you're like, okay, I can go this way with geology or I can go this way with botany, and I'm just going to kind of let the universe decide, in a way. And you got botany, and that is super cool. Again, I feel like people come out of similar paths like that, where you come out of a degree and you're like, oh my gosh, the thing you said about being hard to focus. An environmental science degree can take you so many different ways. So I completely understand I don't know how to focus. I don't know where I want to go. So it was super cool that you got the botany path, went down that path, and then you started and you branched out in all different ways and started studying a bunch of different species around the area. And then the whole, okay, I've done all of this observing, but I want to do more than just observe. I find that very fascinating as the catalyst for starting IAE, the Institute for Applied Ecology. Because I was wondering coming into this if the motivation for starting IAE for you was the culmination of a bunch of different observations through your jobs, like we do this way, but this can maybe be changed, or maybe we can try doing this, but they're not necessarily implementing it. Or was it just a kind of like, I woke up one day and I was like, you know what I want to do? I want to start a nonprofit, So it is really cool to see that it was, the culmination of all the work you did with ODA and all the different species, but also wanting to take it a step further than just monitoring projects. For people that might not know, and for people, I mean me, because I get asked this question all the time and I'm still trying to formulate my most cohesive response to it. If you did not know what applied ecology is, how would you explain the concept of applied ecology?
That's a good question. Applied ecology is using ecological scientific methods to solve real world problems. Sometimes ecologists are doing basic research. They're just trying to understand how the world works and have a better perspective on what are the drivers of how biology interacts with the environment and itself. Applied ecology is using those same ideas, but for specific questions about, say, management of land. So, for example, we might want to know what's the best way to manage habitat for an endangered species. Well, we can use the same kinds of experiments we use in basic research, but target them towards a particular question.
So I heard applied ecology is asking basic questions about how things interact and then applying it to like a particular species or ecosystem to just further knowledge in that field about conserving said species or ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Were you surprised by anything about applied science versus what you had learned during your master's?
I would say that, in graduate school, I tended to focus on more academic questions of just how the world works. And the applied science has given me a way to take that kind of information and use it for good. How's that? Uh, and I would say that the whole field of ecology has evolved over the period of time I've been involved, such that a lot of ecology was really very descriptive and very basic research, just trying to understand how the world works. And while I was in graduate school, the term restoration ecology was coined, and there was a book published by that name. So it was a new idea to use ecology as a tool to restore habitats. Not that there hadn't been people doing restoration prior to that, but the concept got formulated more clearly. It's like, let's be ecologists that do something for the land. And that change, I think, was the wave I rode on, so that it gave us focus and gave us reason. And now, even in basic ecology journals, many of the papers have clear guidance or interpretation of what is my basic ecology useful for. Instead of just saying it's just to understand. Now there are generally people conclude with how can this be applied to some important problem that the earth faces, because the problems are big and real. So that's that was perhaps one of my inspirations for the Institute for Applied Ecology.
I'm picking up on that same trend of wanting to take it a step further, where we're not just doing the observation just to understand what the species might be doing. I like that you're saying applied science is taking the knowledge that ecology practice might generate and then also doing something with it for the earth. And it's interesting, too, that restoration ecology was a term coined during your time in academia, because it kind of feeds into the question that I was going to ask next, which is just how the Institute for Applied Ecology has grown over time. So, we have different programs. We have conservation research and habitat restoration and plant materials and ecological education. There's a lot going on here. And so I'm just wondering, how has this been from your perspective, watching the Institute for Applied Ecology grow into all of these different programs and needs, addressing different needs?
Sure. So the Institute for Applied Ecology has grown over time, for sure. In its first year, I was the only employee. And then I hired a field crew, and we started doing some field research, right? And so it was pretty small. And then we, a few years later, started getting into the area of plant materials. We call it plant materials because it's seeds or cuttings or potted plants or whatever.
Yeah.
All the different ways you can have a plant that you can transport from one place to another and put in the ground. Those are plant materials. And so started getting into that area because we wanted to see more more restoration done.
Mm-hmm.
And around here, if you don't have something else to put on the ground, then you can't restore habitat. There's invasive species in the way. You can get rid of those, but what's going to come up next? You have to put down seeds or put in plants, transplants, etc. Or it won't work. You'll end up with weeds again. So that was, within a few years, we really got into that. And then we formulated a mission statement to conserve native species and habitats through restoration, research, and education. That started to encompass the directions we were going. And so conservation research is one of our programs. It's really the first program. And that's where we've been continuing to do rare species monitoring, but also developing methods and techniques for improving the viability of populations and understanding their responses to climate change and how we can intervene to improve their populations in the face of global change. In the next phase, we added what we call the Native Seed Network. So that was a program that has now been it grew so much, it became two programs. One of them is our plant materials program, and the other is our habitat restoration program. So we started by kind of developing seeds to do restoration and then doing the restoration, and then doing both of those under one program was too big. So we split them up. And now we have a lot of staff in each of those kinds of programs. We also added the education program. First we were just working with kids in schools. We really wanted to bring the message of applied ecology to youngsters so they could understand how they could contribute to a better environment, a healthier world. And it was healthier for kids too. That program has grown now, and we engage prison inmates in conservation by enabling them to start and run native plant nurseries in prisons. And then the plants that they produce are used to rehabilitate public lands where wildfires have killed sagebrush. So mostly they're growing sagebrush that's used to restore habitat for the greater sage grouse, which is a bird headed towards the endangered species list. So these projects sort of develop somewhat organically, and then we build programs around them, and the programs then evolve themselves. And that's taken us to the southwestern U.S. as well, where we have our Southwest branch in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's run by Melanie Giesler, who used to work here in Corvallis, where we are here at the main office, and moved back to New Mexico to continue her career there. And we just started a new branch, and she's been able to build that into really quite a large part of what IAE is and does. More plant materials work, more habitat restoration, more endangered species conservation. We're doing all the same kinds of things in New Mexico as well, and elsewhere in the Southwest.
It's so interesting to hear it start as just you and a field crew and a dream, kind of,
Yeah,
and going
right.
out and doing the monitoring work or the research, setting up basic questions, and then deciding we need to do more plant material stuff. We have to have some kind of seed source. If we're going to do any type of disturbance to the land, we have to replace, bare ground with something else. So now we need plant materials. And I guess doing that kind of disturbance to the land or just modification, that's called habitat restoration. But then how do we tell people how we're doing all of these things? Well, now we have ecological education. So it's kind of interesting to watch it grow and develop. And I like that you said the mission statement was kind of your way to focus in on the way that you wanted to go with the organization and just identifying directions that it needed to grow.
Yeah, it's really been a remarkable journey for me. I can't imagine anything more gratifying than working here. Some of the projects we've taken on and pursued have been our idea. We want to make this happen. And some have been ideas that other people bring to us and say, you need to do this. You're in a position to take this on. And so we've, in some cases, done that. Our work in prisons is a good example where we didn't really see ourselves as doing that kind of work. And it took someone else who's involved in that to say, look, you guys need to be the one to do that here in Oregon. So get on it. That can convince you sometimes that that is an interesting direction. Let's see if we can make that work. And it's been very successful.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you a hard question. Going on the topic of the importance of diversity of floral species, why are native plants so important in the whole race to address climate change?
Well, that's a good question. And it has a few dimensions, I suppose. One of them is plants are the base of the food chain, right? Plants are the organisms that convert solar energy into life. Without plants, our planet would be dead, virtually anyway. So when it comes to climate change, plants are key as well. Plants are absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and converting it into starches and things that plants use to grow. And they fix that carbon. They hold it. They can put it in their roots. They can make it long-term storage in the soil. It's been said that the best machine for fighting climate change is a tree. Because
Oh,
trees
I
are
like that.
pulling carbon right out of the atmosphere. That's what we need to do. But I'm also a diversitist. The ecosystems on Earth are fueled by a diversity of plants. Plant diversity begets animal diversity, but diversity of pollinators, diversity of wildlife, diversity of birds, diversity of soil microorganisms. Plants are at the center of all of these kinds of organisms and their diversity. And what's so important about diversity is it makes ecosystems more robust to change. The more kinds of species we have in a habitat, the more resilient that habitat is to climate change, to disturbance, to all the different things that are pushing that habitat to become something else. So what I'm getting at is diversity makes it so that, say, the amount of biomass produced in a field is about the same every year. If you have just one species growing there, it's going to go really high one year and crashed almost nothing the next. But if you have a diversity, they take over for each other. They take turns being the big producers. This is called complementarity in ecology. It's true also for, say, some endangered species. Like one of the species we work with is golden paintbrush. This is a species that became extinct in Oregon. And we've been able to bring it back by planting seeds and plugs in lots of different places. But what we've learned along the way is that species interacts with the other plants around it directly because it's parasitic in its roots. It taps into the roots of other plants. And the more kinds of plants it has as neighbors increases its survival from year to year. It has a varied diet, so to speak, and it needs that diversity of its diet. Without that diversity, the plants tend to die more frequently. So diversity just improves so many aspects of how ecosystems work that is why I'm a diversitist. When we're talking about how to improve a habitat, a lot of what we need to do is improve the number of species that are in the habitat, not just a few workhorse plants, but a bigger diversity. And that's really where the magic is. Diversity is magic. It does these things that create emerging properties. It's a synergy of species. And this is one of the really important parts of ecology that has developed as a science.
Native species beget ecosystem stability is what I heard.
Yeah, and an ecosystem response to climate change is improved with diversity. Absolutely. And I guess I would overlay that with human diversity is equally important. When we're doing restoration, when we're improving habitats, it's people that allow us to succeed in that. And bringing in different perspectives from different users or different communities, whether that's the scientific community, the indigenous community, the communities of different economic status, all of these kinds of people have perspectives and needs that need to be listened to and brought to bear to make our restorations more successful. And that diversity also begets a more stable approach, a plan that's more sound. So I really think that these go hand in hand.
Yeah. I really appreciate you tying in the human element and the need for diversity, and not only just the plants that we put on the ground or that we're trying to conserve on the ground, but the stakeholders that are actually doing the work,
Yeah.
or that are invested in these like species or these ecosystems. Needing diversity in both dimensions is very critical to getting anything done. I think it's going to be a tradition in this podcast to end interviews with a lightning round of just fun questions, or questions that are intended to be a little bit difficult to answer, but we're going to challenge you. In the briefest of terms that you can manage, we're going to ask a couple of questions to end this off. You ready?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So this is a fun one. What was your favorite job before IAE? And going with that, what was your weirdest job?
Okay. Well, my favorite job before IAE was the job I had right before, which was working for the state of Oregon, Department of Agriculture Plant Conservation Program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just so wonderful because I could drive all around the state and experience so many different habitats and so many species and work with really great people. It's just, hands down, the best job. Before that was working for the National Park Service. That also was a totally cool job. Rave reviews for somebody getting out of college and wants to get into environmental work somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Working for the Park Service was just a great way to do it. My weirdest job, I don't know if you call it weird, but one of my oddest jobs as a teenager was taking used brick and chipping off the old mortar so that the brick could be reused. And I did that for several months. That's a pretty boring job. I did it in the summer and I did it into the cold as well. And, chipping brick is not one of the more stimulating activities, but, it was a job.
It got you ready for the repetitive nature of doing monitoring work.
That's true.
Doing it
That's
over
true.
and over again.
And as a piece of advice my dad gave me was, when you have jobs, one of the things you're learning is what you don't want to do with your career. So, I share that that advice with others now too, that, if they're trying, well, what should I do to get into ecology? It was like, do internships, do short-term jobs, dabble. It gives you contacts, but it also gives you an idea of what you don't want to do.
Good advice. Good advice. What is the weirdest ecosystem you've ever worked in?
That's a good question. The weirdest ecosystem. I'm not sure that any ecosystems are all that weird. I have been caught in quicksand on the Oregon coast.
Okay.
Walking through a sand dune and slipped right into quicksand.
Wow.
And went up to my middle of my thigh before I was like, time to get out of here.
So you're telling me that's something that can actually happen in real life? I thought that was just like a childhood, like irrational fear, but it's actually happened.
I kind of thought it was, overblown idea as well, but no, it's real. Quicksand is a thing and it can swallow you up. So I'm glad I got back out.
All right, Tom, one last question. It's a hard one. I'm going to challenge you to answer it quickly. If you had to pick a favorite plant species that you've worked with, what is your favorite species?
Well, I've had many romances with different plants, but I have to say my favorite plant is golden paintbrush, Castanea levisecta, which you know well too, Sarah, because it's a plant I got to know when I was in college. I flirted with it there. I got to sort of engage with it when I worked for the Park Service a little, actually, too.
Mhm.
And then when I moved back to Oregon, it was sort of a dream to help bring it back to Oregon. And that dream came true. We did bring it back to Oregon, and it does
Nice.
thrive here now. So and it's so cool because it's parasitic on other plants, and it has a really interesting pollination story. And, all these aspects of it are just exciting over and over again.
Yeah, if you have listeners, if you've never seen a golden paintbrush plant, I encourage you to Google it, because not only is it striking visually, but the life history and all the ecology of the plant is super fascinating. And it's really cool that you've kind of had this relationship with this plant over the course of your career. So I like
Yeah.
it. I like
Yeah.
that answer. Oh my gosh. Okay, we did it. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Tom. This was great. I think we hit a lot of really important topics, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Sierra. I really appreciate you and you're developing this podcast. So thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. I hope you had as much fun as I did learning about Tom's journey and how the Institute for Applied Ecology came to be. Next up on Seeds for Change will be a conversation with Sarah Aleka, a restoration ecologist here at IAE doing incredible work restoring native prairie habitats in the state of Oregon. If that sounds exciting to you, then stick around and we'll meet back here next month. Thanks for listening.